Two. So I'm gonna mute everything because you have the owl, so all the sound's gonna come through you.
Okay.
And what that means is I have to mute everything I have so we don't get the feedback.
Like
Hang on, that's me. Hang on.
I don't hear anything.
Hi, Kristen. This is Erin. I'm online as well, and I don't think they've turned on the sound in the room yet, but I can hear you.
Okay, I can hear you too. Hi, Erin.
Hi. All else fails, we'll have a nice visit.
How's your campaign going?
Oh, it's going. It's going. My big push now is to get signs out.
Can you hear us?
We can hear you now.
Uh,
Thank you so much.
hi.
Hi, good morning.
There's a slight time gap in there.
This is.
Go like that, and it's to go like that.
Okay, sounds official. Yes. Yes, it does.
Here.
It is.
Michelle.
She said that I feel and installed.
Yeah, right on.
They've had.
Also, hey.
Oh, come on.
There's a great. Yeah, that was also, and then.
What happens? Doing stuff like that, stuff. Yeah, exactly. We need to talk about that process. Yeah.
So you can put yourself on mute here.
No muting it. Everyone's gonna hear you.
Wait a couple more minutes and see if, I see Kristen up there in the corner of the screen, so he's not gonna make it here in person.
I think we'll have, no, don't that's right.
Oh,
But then
Kristen,
turning, so it's been like, it was like good experience for me. I think it's apply for another STR in the place that they're buying, so this one is.
Good for you.
Yes. I know.
I'm sure I have this here, but I can read from the end.
I just want to make sure. It's a sector, it's a sector.
Michelle, we were waiting for you.
Yeah,
so we
perfect.
could get started.
Why, right up to this point. Teach Chico. So. That's not a Yes, because I'm sure that's been.
Arthur, are you ready to get started?
I am ready. You are.
Okay, let's get started with the meeting. Start out with introductions. And I guess I'll just start out by going to my left.
Chester, with an Manzanita North Coast representative.
Greg Walton, ex officio member of development committee.
Michelle Young, employer representative.
Parker Salmons, Tillamook County Housing Coordinator.
Sarah Absher, Community Development Director. Sarah Dental, the real estate representative.
Dave Bennett, South County Representative.
Carrie Fleischer, Vice Chair and at-large member.
And I'm Ed Gallagher. I'm Chair of the Commission and live in North County. Yeah.
Rich Frankie, bigger idea.
Great. Well, does anybody have a mission? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner and Kristen. Please go ahead.
Okay. I'm Kristen Katiuk. I'm at-large member based in Rockaway.
And good morning, Erin Scar, Tillamook County Commissioner. I am the liaison to this group.
Okay, a couple more people up there. Let's see. Anybody else want to introduce themselves or on the video?
Hi, I'm Marlisa. I am the Houseless Action Network project manager.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay, well, we'll get started with mission minute. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share? Parker's thinking.
It's been a lot going on.
He's got a lot to share, but that's on the agenda. Okay, well, we'll just continue on and any public comment? Okay, there's a public comment at the end, so if you think of something that we've said that you want to comment on, please. Here. Yeah. Okay, Parker, you want to talk about ADUs?
Yes, so in your small packet in front of you, there is a letter that I have drafted from the Tillamook County Housing Commission in support of the rural residential zoned area changes. Next minute. Give a moment to changes, but then I would ask for your approval and signing this letter as the Tillamook County Housing Commission. And for anybody at home, this is available on the Tillamook County Housing Commission website. And with your permission, I thought I'll just read it aloud as everybody has, kind of takes it in. But the mission of the Tillamook County Housing Commission is to collaboratively advocate for the attainable and equitable solutions that impact Tillamook County's greatest housing needs. The proposed changes to the rural residential zone are in line with the mission. Accessory dwelling units are an important tool in addressing Tillamook County's greatest housing needs. The benefits of ADUs are numerous. ADUs help foster multi-generational living, are space efficient, benefit both homeowner and renter, and generally are more affordable than other housing options, strengthen our community, and ease the extreme demand for housing in Tillamook County. As advocates for the greatest housing needs, it is our duty to support the lowest barrier options available. The Housing Commission appreciates the challenges and complexities of proposed text amendment language to allow the siting of recreational vehicles to serve as housing options on rural residential zone property. While the Housing Commission supports the inclusion of the RV provision, we understand that it may not be an attainable low barrier solution at this time. The Housing Commission urges further commission of these proposed amendments to achieve a viable low barrier housing solution for rural residential areas. The Housing Commission appreciates and supports the proposed changes to the rural residential zoned areas and thanks the Planning Commission for the hard work that's gone into crafting them. So to remind everybody, there is a provision that was came out of the previous legislative session. This is 1013. And this was an option to allow recreational vehicles in these areas to be but a how did we describe what that was going to look like? I forget. It's not important. It's not. But basically, there is an ability to allow recreational vehicles to serve as housing in a legal manner, and the legislation was crafted a little hastily and did not address some key concerns such as sunset dates. So if we enacted something like this now, we would have to allow it forever. And because the legislation did not include a sunset date, that makes it difficult.
So in addition to that, thank you, Parker. We've had one planning commission hearing, and I have been speaking with my colleagues in various counties across Oregon. Tillamook and Deschutes are the only two counties that are considering this. The Deschutes County Planning Commission initially recommended that the Board of Commissioners not approve the RV siting language, not only for the provisions that Parker has shared with, once it becomes a vested property right, should it be something in the future that is decided is no longer needed, you can't undo that. With that, the bill didn't talk about appropriate siting standards, setbacks, requirements for self-contained units to make sure they have a bathroom and a cooking facility. And at the Planning Commission, we actually had a almost 4-hour meeting about these provisions. The rural residential ones we got for the ADU, we got through in about an hour and a half, and we spent a long period of time talking about how we could work through the language for the siting of an RV in a manner that not only provides low barrier housing options, but also thinking about the neighbors around. Right, that how, making sure that we had appropriate siting standards for public health, welfare, safety. Do they have to have a bathroom? Do they need to have cooking facilities? And when we started talking about reshaping and refining all of this, the other concern then that came into play is now, are we creating something that is now no longer affordable and a low barrier housing option? So I am going back to the Planning Commission. We are continuing this work next Thursday night. This is something, in talking to my colleagues, because Deschutes is struggling with all of the same concerns that we are. Everybody wants to get to yes, but it's all of those unintended consequences, both for the person who needs the housing and for the area around that property, to make sure we are doing the best we can for everyone in that vicinity. There's conversations about a legislative fix. Could we look at a sunset date? Could we ask the legislature to consider putting in some development standards so that when we move forward, one of the things we talked about was, if your neighbor had an RV that someone was living in and they don't have cooking facilities inside and they're cooking outside every day, how, is that going to indirectly and unintentionally result in an impact to the neighbors? What if they have a facility that doesn't have a restroom and now there's potentially a porta potty on the property? What if the garage isn't wired with the appropriate amps to plug in that RV and they're plugging in, with a standard cord? What is the appropriate fire safety step back? So when you're looking at something that's ultimately combustible, now you have a fire risk. So those are all of the things that we're working through. I also met with DLCD last week. We talked through some of this. I think we can find a way to move forward. I'm just not sure if it's going to be now or with some additional support from the legislature, but we appreciate this letter.
And I wanted to call that out because I know that low barrier housing is a priority for us in so many ways. And I wanted to include just kind of a support for that, even though it doesn't look like it might not be part of it this round. We would like it to hopefully come back and revisit this when we have the legislative support needed to make this a functioning ordinance. So is there any questions, or do we feel comfortable signing this letter?
I just wanted to comment. I was like one of the original supporters of the 1013. And the reason why I truly supported it was because it could allow for a low barrier option, but also my vision was that this could be an opportunity in which the property owner could save up money to replace it with an ADU. To make it be a lower cost solution for them to provide housing, either for their family or what have you, or even a neighbor. But in the long term, as a goal to convert that to a permanent ADU. So that was kind of my thoughts behind it, but I do appreciate the work being done to find an equitable solution, because yes, I mean, I never thought about cooking outside and a functional bathroom. I don't think that would be some sort of, because I know there was citing for requirements in there for that the county can put in place. But yeah, I definitely see that there's additional discussions that need to be made on what those standards are.
Yeah, on the bathroom one of the things that I hear from the farming community is that we are monitored very closely for any effluent that leaves our property and goes into the ground without the proper due diligence. And yet we have a lot of that happening, human waste in various ways, and RV, dwelling without proper facilities is one of them. So I think this is important, and I think it is important to signal that this does matter to public health and is much more than the very highly regulated dairy industry in the community. So yes, I appreciate that part of this. Carrie would like to see this become an option, and I think in most cases it would be used appropriately and there would be appropriate measures, but there will be those outliers that kind of ruin it for everyone else. Just not grammatically, but semantically, the only thing that I know, that came to my mind, but I know it won't matter to the audience that this is going to, is it's making an inference that the reader knows that RVs are considered accessory dwelling units, which I never thought they were.
Yeah.
So I feel like that language could be there could be a little bit of a transition, saying
Because these are two things.
two separate things, right? It reads like it's one thing, and I was like, oh, I didn't think that was the case. So now I know.
I can see that now, and that is definitely me and my bias and not thinking about my audience clearly enough. But I will definitely make those changes.
Yeah, I think the planning commission will probably get it, but I do think that just if we're putting it out there and somebody else reads it, they might be confused.
Yeah, I will add a sentence at the beginning of the paragraph talking about the RVs that separates, that makes me.
Okay.
And another thing that we would like to mention or advocate for.
Mhm.
With those changes, can I get your approval to have the?
All in favor?
I,
Thank you so much.
Hey, Parker, I wanted to raise one other issue that you and I talked about before. Even with an RV siting or an ADU, the issue of how property is assessed into the future. And, I think it's been an issue in some jurisdictions where the whole property gets reassessed and you may be on a situation where your property value is fairly low because you've lived there a long time. ADU comes in, does the whole property get assessed? And that's been a barrier in some areas for doing ADUs.
Yeah.
I can comment on that.
Good, I figured you could.
We have received, Washington, I believe it was Multnomah County that originally did that. They brought in ADUs. They considered that a zone change and because the zone was modified. And, so they use it as a zone change and reset an assessed value on the entire property. We've since received guidance that ADUs do not change the primary usage of the property. It is a accessory to a residential property. So in that case, we would only add exception value for that ADU,
Right,
not the underlying property or the entire property as a whole, because the primary use of that property is still residential.
yeah,
So in that case, the property owner that does place an ADU will see an increase in their assessed values due to the new construction of that ADU.
right.
Isn't there a bill floating around to address that and actually exempt that?
There is new legislation that may possibly, but it has to be adopted. That was part of the Governor Codex legislation this year. We are, as a legislative committee, we haven't fully dove into all, that was a very large bill. And we really need to dive into the meat of that to really understand, but ADUs were mentioned as an option to be incentivized through county approval or adoption of that exemption program, but we're not sure exactly how that could be done, and that probably would require a lot of coordination between just the legislative committee to understand the need, as well as bring it forward to the housing commission and understanding the impacts of that, especially on just as tax impacts too going forward.
Sure. Thank you.
That's good news. That would have been a stumbling block for sure. Okay, I guess you're up next, Parker.
I am. Next, I would like to just kind of provide some updates on the funding that I'm chasing. One of the things that we did in the development committee this month was to kind of review these options and kind of establish or look for some other targets as well. And so on Monday, I will be going to Portland to speak at the Oregon Facilities Authority board meeting. And joining me will be Sarah Lou Keith from Colpack. And we will be basically talking and singing the praises of the Housing Commission and the work that we do and our ability to have a competitive process for distributing funds. And to remind you guys, the Oregon Facilities Authority reached out to us after several of our developers inquired about this pre-development funding. And this is pre-development funding or financing, not a grant, not funding. This is a loan, and it's up to $500,000 that can be, it's a revolving loan fund. And this is for taking down the land, doing the risky pre-development work. And this is a loan that gets paid back when the developer gets to their forever bank financing. So generally, these loans are intended to be less than a year long loans to just get those projects rolling. So I will be doing that, and then our application has gone off for the DEQ and EPA, or the DEQ application for the EPA funds. And that is for the space efficient 800 square feet and less units. And it is a $20,000 per unit incentive. And Home First Development has expressed a lot of interest in this fund. The Maker project would be qualified for this fund. Jeff Wong's project, Hobsonville, might qualify for that fund, but I believe they will definitely qualify for the OFA. The point is that of the funds we are chasing, we have in our pipeline enough projects to move about 80% if we got everything we wanted to straight out the door into projects that are qualified and in the correct stage of development. So but that doesn't mean we just get to write a check and give it to them. We will have to go through the same competitive process that we've been going through. And it might even be a more rigorous one because of these new stipulations that will be attached to each of these funds. And all of that is a way of me transitioning this discussion into our next topic, which is workflow, Housing Commission workflow discussion. And I'm going to share my screen.
Parker, quick question for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
With regard to the DEQ funds that might be available, how does that fit? Is that for developers only, or would somebody who's trying to build an ADU in the back of their place, would they qualify because of the size?
Thank you for asking that question. Yes, this is not just for large footprint housing. This is absolutely for ADUs, or one of the items that are specifically listed in the fact sheet for this fund for being supported. One of the conversations I had with them was, could we take a portion of this and reserve it to pay the SDC fees of ADUs? And they said, yes, as long as they met all the other requirements of the project, that would be something that would be on the table. How that works gets a little complicated though, because it's pretty onerous to have an individual person come through and apply for this fund, show that they're meeting all of the requirements. There is this carbon reduction mandate in the materials that you use for this project. It's a 10% reduction. So when I have spoken to our developers and asked questions, I said, hey, there is this mandate that these projects have reduced the carbon footprint of their materials by 10%. Is that a difficult thing for you? Is that an onerous thing on your process? And they said, no, we have the formula for that. We plug in our materials and we make adjustments until we hit that reduction number. So developers understand this really well. That is the extent of my understanding. Is that the average homeowner is not going to know how to do that calculation. So if we want to make this available for individual homeowners to support their ADU project, we need to make sure that there's a mechanism in place to help them achieve that. And that might be something that perhaps the development committee, I'm not sure where we would do that, but that is something that I envision us needing to provide that support. The other way we could approach that ADU question and how to support individual homeowners through that fund would be to find some developers willing to participate in an ADU building option, to be able to direct homeowners and say, each one of these understands the process of receiving these funds. They've demonstrated to us that they are able to make the calculation on the carbon reduction. And if you work with them, they will be able to help make your application. So there's a couple of different ways that we can do that. And again, this is flowing so perfectly into my slides here that I'm going to start moving into them.
Parker, the ability to tie it to the SDC would seem to be really big, because on an ADU, the SDC is gonna be a big chunk of the cost.
They are actually about the exact amount. When the DEQ contacted me for guidance on how to write their application, they asked if $20,000, which was their target amount, was enough. And I said, it's a great number because it is about the cost of an SDC fee for an ADU, which is one of the major barriers for a homeowner in wanting to add that.
Right.
And it's interesting, just a side comment, as I've had more discussions about ADUs, the psychological barrier of an SDC fee is larger than the financial one. That when people start calculating their ADU costs, they can understand all of the construction costs. But once that SDC fee hits and they don't see it reflected in the building cost, they see that as a wasted expense. So I think that there might be an educational opportunity here too.
Having just done this, I can tell you one of the other psychological barriers is you paying as much as you would if you put up a 3,000 square foot home and you're putting up an 800 or smaller square foot home. It's infuriating because you're trying to do something to save money and do something economically, and there's no ratio or relevant cost structure on the SDC side of it. So I think this is huge.
And this is something that we've talked a lot about. And as we approach our next analysis, it's something I want to kind of get the conversation more elevated about. I believe that there is a really strong argument for tying SDCs to square footage. And this is something that has come up in all the regions in various manners. This is something that came up a lot in the Molnar's project. Because they have tiny homes and they're going to be paying 8 SBC fees for the same, or 6 SBC fees for the same small amount of square footage that one house would occupy. So there is this inequity in the SBC fee structure that I believe needs to be addressed. But it's going to take some time to gather data to build a really strong argument. SBC fees are really important. And remember that one of our other biggest challenges is infrastructure. And so this is a chicken or egg. This is a catch-22 of funding, where we need to make sure that we're being equitable, but we also need to remember that this is a key function to allowing more housing capacity overall and in the future and in the long term. So it's a very careful balancing act that we'll have to do, but I'm confident that we can find a fee structure that is fair, equitable, and reflective of what SBCs are intended to do.
So, go ahead.
Can you give like a Spark Notes version of SDC fees? Like, where do they come from? What do they cover? And where does the money go?
How I like to describe SBC fees is when you build a house in a community, there's all of this established infrastructure that you are purchasing yourself into. There's streetlights, there's roads, there's all of these things that you weren't there to pay the taxes for, but all the people in that community were. And so the SBC fee is your way of buying into the system and into the infrastructure that has already been paid for by the people who have been living in that community. And so it also is because now that you are coming into this, the system needs to grow. And it's not fair to make everybody who's been in the community forever basically pay for all the infrastructure, make it nice and easy, so you just have to build your house and go. So there is this aspect of SBC fees where you are really, it's your initial contribution with your new property into the system. Did I get that about right?
Yeah, I think so. I think Commissioner Scar also wanted to comment on that.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Because the other piece I wanted to comment on is that SDCs are controlled by cities in which you may be building, and SDCs are controlled by special districts for water and sewer throughout the unincorporated areas of the county. So when we start talking about SDCs, one of the things that we need to remember is the county does not control that structure. This would be a partnership and a collaboration. It would be an encouragement, but we have to be really careful because we, as the county and the county Housing Commission, don't have the right to dictate to others what they must do or should do with their fees. So that's the other delicate dance of the SDC, is that it's not ours to control. So just kind of keep that in everybody's mind as well as we think about, we can come up with a great structure to Parker's point. However, our friends who control it, have to feel that it's a great structure and that it will meet their needs of getting enough money to expand their systems, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely a delicate dance. Thank you.
It will be a hard sell, but I everything is true and agreed with what the Commissioner said. Just need you guys to remember that we can try to make that sale though. And there is enough buzz around this that I think that there's some areas will be receptive. And if we can really prove the benefits of this, then.
Well, and I think just to jump in, I think that the key, having worked with these districts for a couple of decades, the best way to bring this approach forward to where they feel supported is the work that Parker is doing with getting the funding, right? I think what we're looking at is a supplemental strategy, because also in South County, there's a lot of small districts that are barely running and functioning. Right, that money is so critical to their future operation. And so just to echo what Commissioner said too, we have to come to the table and bring that support.
We're all carrying here.
Yeah, I wonder if there's any kind of state legislative help in terms of the proportionality issue. Would that be a state function to comment on that?
So there's legislative action that has money for infrastructure. So Carrie or Parker, I don't know, or Commissioner, I think there's opportunities for us to use some of that, perhaps.
Not only that, but in this conversation, it's gotten me turning that this is kind of an equity issue in a lot of ways. And there are other non-housing funds for resolving equity that we might want to investigate. Basically, there's a lot of, we got to go find some more carrots if we want SDC fees to get changed.
And I just wanted to comment and just in general, how they come up with that amount is all of the special district cities, they have master plans.
That's right.
That it's like 20 or 30 years in length that dictates what their future projects are. And typically what they have done in the past is they come up with this grand total and then divide it by the number of equivalent dwelling units to determine what that fee is gonna be per dwelling unit. And then for commercial or other higher most intensity uses, they come up with some ratio. Say, okay, a store, a mom and pop store is 2 times an 80 equivalent dwelling unit. So it would be a matter of showing that an ADU is not necessarily an equivalent dwelling unit and changing that formula. Possibly.
Well, I would be honest and share, because my conversations with districts are weekly because of development and permits. They are very cognizant of that. I don't think that's the issue. I think it goes back to your point of they have master plans, they have infrastructure maintenance, they have new infrastructure needs. And I think the key is to bring them funding to help offset those things.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, the politics of equitable, again, how you approach, because just living in Manzanita, we've had very low SDCs forever. I mean, for new development here, won't cost much, but suddenly, we now are beginning, and so if that's being sold, that's kind of a harsh term, but the point is, so Manzanita does not, I guess, just say developers, come on down, we'll absorb your costs.
Oh,
And so we're in the middle of that period, so having extra money to say, well, this is a good cause, say Manzanita Maker or, is the way to go. And if you have money to help ease the burden that way.
So it's something that needs to be like an if-then scenario, right? So like if you can reduce I'm gonna like SDC fees, then, you know, like here's this alternative source of funds to be able to offset this.
We
Our,
can,
our grant funding, you know, can be characterized as offsetting SDCs also.
Mhm.
So it shows the money coming into the county for these programs and going back out to the cities and special districts when projects are developed.
I'm just curious though, because an ADU is a single dwelling and our grant funding is multifamily.
Right.
By design, so are we going to modify, is that the next thing on our agenda? Keep going.
Commissioner Scar?
Yes.
I was
Commissioner
gonna say,
Carr?
yeah, thank you. If there's anybody who is really, wants to be an SDC wonk, there is a report that was prepared for the legislature by Oregon Housing Community Services. It was released in December of 22, and it was a study of SDC fees all across the state of Oregon. It talks about, why they exist, how they exist, what the variation in cost is, that whole thing. It's a 236-page report. But if you're interested, I just found it real quick on my other computer app, but search the SDC Oregon study, and you can find that if you just are someone who wants to know more.
Some of the SDC, I've looked at some like the city of Corvallis, I looked at their SDC program. And very sophisticated. I mean, they hired consultants to come in and create their SDC plans so they don't get, sued, I guess, by people that you didn't justify appropriately, a street SDC or for other utilities.
Interesting.
Well, I think it does bear repeating that it's the responsibility of the cities to do that and the districts to do that is high, and it's desirable, because if they don't, then we end up having issues like we're seeing in the city of Tillamook, where the infrastructure hasn't been maintained and now we are at a full stop on development. So I think that, we really need to be careful that we don't vilify SDCs, because they're a critical investment. And with how much inflation and other costs are bending upward, whatever that master plan is today is anyone's guess 10, 20 years from now, and probably underestimates the actual cost that's coming for the next set of development. So I think finding sources to support SDCs, and particularly finding those federal and state legislative direct supports for that infrastructure that could help. But then I do think we need to work with the cities and districts to say, okay, we helped facilitate getting this big pot of money. What does that shake out and look like now for making some proportional changes to the actual assessment of those fees going forward for incentivizing the right kinds of development that we need?
Because if we go and get SDC fee money, we don't want it to be paying down SDCs.
Exactly, right.
So,
Great.
yeah. Well, it sounds like SDC fees is something that we will be continuing to have a conversation about. And it does seem like finding ways to support the cities with SDC funding options is a priority. And so it's great that one of our funds does allow that.
And as Commissioner Scar said, we do not want to come across like we're vilifying or dictating or anything related to it, because it's their program.
It is their program. And some of those master plans will be impacted by changes coming up, and the amount of SDCs that could be expected for any certain number of plots of land or lots might be more. So those numbers might have changed as things like 406 start to roll out. So there is a whole bunch. This is a really good time for us to be becoming experts on this and to be able to be prepared to support all the cities as these kind of changes happen. And hopefully we can find ways to support SDCs that will bring us the development that's so sorely needed. Anybody else have any comments on this? Greg, you've worked with cities with lots of different SDC structures and fees.
Well,
being a builder developer, I've kind of, seems like I'd be more for no SDCs, but also devil's advocate against the same comment. There's a lot of workarounds there, and I think it's a slippery slope as far as trying to get them to lower them. Because you could buy a piece of property in most cities out here and put a single wide or a double wide manufactured home on it. And you pay your SDC fees. So maybe if you did a single wide, like some of the old ones in Rockaway, which we have one of those, they, it stays 600 square foot unit. They paid all the SDC fees 40 years ago. And now you can tear that old trailer down
That's right.
and build a 2,000 square foot house on that property and no fees.
Wow.
So for everyone who says, I want to have a cheap fee because I'm only building a 600 square foot unit on my property, what happens in 10 years when you tear it down and build a 3,000 square foot house there because the zoning changed and now you can have 2 residential dwellings?
Yeah, that's absolutely.
So it's a bummer when you want to do an ADU and it's like, oh, this huge cost. But as a developer, a builder, it's like homeowners, it's just a line item. It's just one more line on their paper that's included in the big picture and they don't think about it really. It's a bummer. It's 20 grand. It's a lot of money.
But it does help explain why the city would rationalize.
Because if they like, well, you can pay this much and you can pay this much and you can pay this much, it's like, how many times can they do that before they go crazy? And they're like, one fee.
Well, and they won't, like, the cities won't ever be able to capitalize that on again, which is why up front you're paying that higher end because they're not ever going to.
And that's what I was trying to, that's how I started out. It seems like having one fee and having it be normal with some sort of a help to cover it for things that qualify, it makes the most sense. But trying to get cities to lower fees for this or that.
That makes sense.
I mean, maybe having them, like Parker mentioned to me at one point, they have like a deferral program.
Yeah,
So you can defer your fees to later if you're doing a lot of work. That's helpful, because you're not coming up with it the first day, you know? So that's nice, but I think trying to get people to lower them, the cities to lower them, I think probably in the long run is a bad idea. The only thing I think would make sense, if it is part of a master plan, they have this master plan for the next 30 years. Well, now, if the master plan is based on zoning today, but tomorrow you're changing your zoning, basically doubling the density for your entire city, well, then shouldn't the master plan be adjusted?
Yeah.
That is a conversation as we move forward with Senate Bill 406. I've already started talking to some of the water and sewer districts.
Yeah. Cause we just did our SECs for a house in Manzanita over the course of the last few months, and water alone was almost $10,000 just for the water meter.
Well, and to your point, we do permits all the time for replacement dwellings. And the water and sewer availability letters, all of that stuff, if those utilities are all on site, they're already there.
You don't pay. And then some of the rural areas, like in the north end of Rockaway, we have a lot there, it's on septic.
That's right.
So there's no sewer connection fee. So there's ways around it. So it's like you already can skirt the issue and get away from SDC fees anyway. So it's like trying to make them lower for the handful of people who, it's a pain in the butt for, which I get. Money's, hard to come by. It doesn't seem like it really makes a lot of sense.
So we just need to find funding.
we need to find funding, but something you said there made me realize that the relationship between specifically ADUs and SDC fees is somewhat unique.
Yep.
Because of what you were saying about, build a 600 square foot house, knock it down and build a 3,200 square foot house. That can't happen with an ADU. ADUs have square footage caps from the get-go.
Well, today,
But when we changed the zoning, like the middle housing
In
and
10 years.
406 allows up to 4 units outright.
their ADU turned into a
It
four.
just changed.
Yep.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, okay. All right, fair.
So we're not gonna beat up on the special districts. We're gonna help them find.
We are
money.
gonna help.
That's right. That's the.
The path forward is find SDC funding for the individual homeowners so that we can really help individual families get another unit on their property for grandma or their kid who just got home from college or whatever it is.
Yeah, and people having the ability, like, as some of the zoning stuff loosens up, like, that is such an amazing investment for somebody to be able to have the opportunity to build something now, right? Build an ADU that then can turn around and maybe it can turn into a multifamily thing. I mean, like, that's a really neat opportunity for people to build their own wealth.
So you would think paying full SDCs is kind of an investment into your future.
Yeah.
I like a deferral though, because the finance, if they don't qualify for funding or don't have it, that could be the barrier to getting it built.
So just the deferral that came out of the legislature, and Carrie, you'll have to remind me if I got this wrong, but I believe it's 180 days till occupancy. So you get a half a year or occupancy. Was that, you remember?
We're gonna have to
Yeah.
defer.
We're gonna say this is a not fact here, just this might be the case, but there was some amount of SDC deferral, but it's only for a short amount of time and it is until occupancy. They're never gonna defer it past occupancy.
Before we move on, I just want to share something that is a philosophy that I've learned how to use with dealing with things that are intractable and challenging, Sisyphean in nature. Instead of always trying to climb over the mountains, sometimes we need to be like water and flow around them. So, this has been a good conversation about the path to getting to what we think is going to be the best, most efficient path, and not climbing the SDC mountain, but finding those ravines that'll take us around them is probably a good strategy.
I agree. I agree. Productive conversation here. Well, now some good news. Good news. Well, the education, that is good news, but now some really good news. The multifamily rental housing fund is now the Housing Production Solutions Fund.
Proposal anyway. It's a unilateral name change.
I guess I've asked for adoption here, but this came out of the education committee meeting. I'm sorry if this was part of your update. I just wanted to get it out there so I didn't have to say housing fund many more times. I'm hoping that might have been it. That might have been the last one. So unless there's any extreme objection or anybody can find anything terribly wrong with this, I would like to start referring to this fund that we have as the Housing Production Solutions Fund.
Hey, Parker, you should also mention that our development committee, we go by DevCom.
Yeah, we would
Where are you going? I can't say much, but I'm going to DevCom.
I'll allow a moment for anybody to provide feedback or questions. Well, yeehaw, that is great. I'm very excited to no longer refer to it as the. So with that, I would like to go on to our Housing Commission workflow discussion.
So Parker,
Yep.
I'm gonna pop this out so everybody in the room can see it.
Okay.
That means
Yep.
we're not gonna see if anybody has their hand raised.
Oh, so I will pay attention to that.
Yep. Maybe. There we go. Needs a copy. It does.
Working.
There
There we go.
Okay.
All right. So I have a few flow charts here, and these are just to facilitate this discussion. I'm the only person who attends all of the committee meetings. And I am seeing that there are so many ways that the committees can work together. But because of the nature of how we all go and have our committees and we come back to the Housing Commission and we talk about it, I feel like we're missing some opportunities to establish how the committees work together and what the workflow is for certain items. So for this one, this is the Housing Production Solutions Fund flowchart. And it begins with education and outreach, publicizing the fact that we are opening applications and that this is a thing that you can apply for. And then we direct them to the application. They create their application, they apply for the fund, and it comes to the Housing Commission for those presentations, the qualitative evaluation. It gets kicked to the Finance Committee for the financial and quantitative evaluation. And then it comes back to the Housing Commission for an allocation recommendation. I just kind of wanted to illustrate this as we start gearing up for our next cycle coming in September. That this is kind of how things flow for this one. And I think it's pretty good. I don't know if there's a whole lot we need to change about this, how we've been running our fund. But we have new funds hopefully coming in soon. And that might require us to evaluate some of these workflows and changes. So for example, what if we identify new funding? So this has already happened. We've identified these DEQ and OFA potential sources, but those aren't going to be able to flow nice and neat into our current system. We have to do some internal work on them first. And so in this case, I'm gonna take an example from our legislative session, just there were funding opportunities that came out of new legislation. And this is more where I'm opening it up for discussions. What I envision and what I see happening next is those legislative funding options are taken to the finance committee, who evaluates them, understands them, kind of gets a one sheet together or just some facts, what the limitations are. Is this something we can achieve? Is this something we can administer? Then it should go to the development committee, who looks at the funds, because now it's been vetted through finance, and say, where could this apply? Who could this apply to? Going to education and outreach, they now have this thing from finance that says, this is a thing we can do. And we have development saying, here are the people who could do it. And education and outreach, do we then go out and find those people? Or do we publicize that this is a thing? And then how do we get it from that portion down to the project? So this one is very much open for discussion. I showed the last one because we have a pretty successful system for that one. But now I'm really interested in hearing what you guys think of this type of workflow. And we'll just keep it to this topic of identifying a new fund. Money has fallen from the sky, and manna from heaven. And what do we do with it? You know, I want to start having our baskets to collect it and distribute it. So I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on that and what you think the best workflow is in that kind of scenario.
Okay. I just, we're talking about how to maybe separate pre-development from our other projects as part of our existing grant program. So this concept may be another third leg in that process.
Absolutely. This could affect the previous slide, and we might need to have a slide for this one that kind of shows if it's pre-development, what the flow is, and if it's construction, what the flow is.
On this one, does it need, like, after it goes through education and outreach and has gone through development, does it need to pop back into finance really quick? And like, this is, like, get a little bit more. I don't know if any of that will change or if there's like a check-in.
No, I hear you saying it's kind of like it would almost be like it gets to project and then it kind of swings back up all the way to finance.
Yeah.
That's a very fair point, because
A lot of times things change, like when you start planning something, and I guess that, talking about what it's kind of arbitrary, or not arbitrary, but like, we don't know specifically what we're looking at, but a lot of times when you're planning something, some of those things shift a little bit, so
right.
going back through and having finance.
That makes sense to me. I mean, I kind of feels like finance and development should be checking in on all these projects that we kind of have eyes on and tabs on as they go.
Is there a reason we wouldn't take the Housing Production Solutions Fund umbrella and break it down into branches where this is our fund that we manage with the funds that are being accumulated, for lack of a better word, by mechanisms within the county. These are outside funding sources, but we need the same kind of vetting process, but we follow the criteria for those. It just seems like we're gonna be kind of chasing our tail a lot as each little new funding source comes up, and we only meet once a month. It just feels like we're gonna just be a little scattered if we're doing those. And then it doesn't go, obviously, it doesn't get from education and outreach to project. It goes through whatever, if it's the county or Colpack or whoever, I'm assuming, or the project developer gets directly connected to the funding source and they go through whatever the process is directly. But there's still some intermediary there that isn't listed yet on
Yes.
that.
That is not a complete beginning to end. That was just flowing through committee work. Just kind of showing like how it would, one funding or one project would move through committee work. But it seems like Michelle must have gotten a copy of my slide deck ahead of time.
I'm talking.
Yeah, you're one slide ahead of me, which I love. You're like my personal transition, slide transition.
Michelle, what's next?
Yeah, going to be.
If you can guess what's next, I'll be impressed. But if anybody would, it'd be you. So, but Michelle brings up a very, very good point here. which is we now have, or hopefully we will have multiple buckets. It's if I'm 100% successful at my job, we'll have a whole bunch of buckets. And each one of these buckets of money is going to have different stipulations on it. When we play with the Housing Production Solution Fund, that's ours. That's the county's. There's no other organization who is setting restrictions on it like we are about to encounter. Because the OFA fund, that bucket on the right, that is financing. That is good for pre-development only and is a revolving loan fund, and it's for middle income projects. They don't even define middle income very well. The DEQ is for space efficient, less than 800 square foot housing that has a carbon reduction mandate. And then our Housing Production Solutions Fund, which we all know the stipulations on. So as we grow, we are facing this moment of trying to decide what these new processes look like. And this slide here illustrates what I kind of envision happening, which is I've identified a project has come to us and been like, hey, I want to develop affordable housing in Tillamook County. And I got a whole, I've got like 50% of the funds I need. We would then have them apply to us and we would have this application process. And one of the questions I have for you is that multiple different types of applications, or do we only want to have one type of application where somebody comes in and they have one standardized forma that everybody who applies to us fills out? They understand that there is multiple funding options at the end of this, but we act as the sorting hat, to sort of speak, and we funnel them into the appropriate bucket or buckets, as the case may be. But Michelle brings up this really great point, because if we stick with the way that we have established our application process for the Housing Production Solutions Fund, that's not going to meet the threshold of requirements for all of them. And so in that case, we would then have to set up a whole nother application process for each one of these. But where I see the Housing Commission going is being this absolute expert evaluators of housing projects in Tillamook County. And it's what the reputation of this organization is. And that reputation is so strong that there are state and federal agencies coming to us and being like, hey, you guys already know how to do this. Nobody else does. And we want to pass our funds through to you because everybody else would have to set up a process from the ground up, and you guys have one in place. And so it's my opinion that making these processes improved, streamlined, and getting us to being even more expert level evaluators of projects is a top priority. It's, in my opinion, I think that is what is bringing us the cheese back to Tillamook here, is that we got this great group and that we're established and that we're ahead of the game. There aren't citizen committees like ours that are better at evaluating housing projects anywhere.
Well, and I think to that, what you were saying about having one application that is going to encompass that. Because if we're, like on the consumer side of things, if we're getting to where we're asking people to fill out 4 different applications, that each application takes an hour and a half to fill out, like that's not a good use of anybody's time, because then we're also going to have to filter through 4 applications that are,
Yeah.
I definitely agree that having one application, I mean, even if they have to fill out some sort of supplemental information, once we've determined the bucket,
Mhm.
I think that's fine. If there's more specific information required for DEQ, that you have to meet that threshold for recycling and that sort of thing, additional commitments. And once we've identified that money where it's going, I agree, because I know the school board realm there were like 6 applications needed for some grants. And it got so onerous that now the Department of Education has dived it down into one application for like 6 different programs. And it's so much easier to administer that we're able to, it's just simpler.
Yeah.
Both on the district and both on them too.
and it's gonna bring all different people to the table, right? Where if something gets too cumbersome, there will be people that will walk, which sometimes that's nice because it weeds out people, but when we're wanting to make this not somebody that does this will bring people to the table that aren't in housing every single day, doing this day in and day out. And we actually want those people to do this because they might start to do that day in and day out. And we want to be able to kind of help have this be a beginner and a expert level application that can maybe bring some beginner that's going to be an expert in 10 years down the road.
Parker, would you, one of the things that you could do as a staff person would be the application comes in and you have these buckets checked off of, and then you determine which ones the project potentially would be eligible for.
Right.
And start that process of thinning it down. I would look at it maybe as that, if somebody could get $20,000, we may want to use our, fund for something else. If the 20 got them over the limit and made a good project for them.
Point.
Yeah.
So,
And our fund will remain the most flexible. And so that's an important thing to remember.
So it seems to also come back to, there's only you. I mean.
Yeah.
This is administrative. Heavy lift,
Yes.
and we're here, but you'd be funneling. And I just would worry about you going insane at some point.
So I can jump in there, Mark. I appreciate that. So we do have an administrative,
Oh.
an office specialist too, for the housing division.
Oh.
If and when the day comes
Okay.
when we need that support administrative staff. So Parker and I check in with Commissioner Scar as our liaison regularly about that.
So when I start to go crazy, they're gonna tell and we'll start the
Okay,
conversation.
but that's not an issue today.
But if we hire someone, it does not mean he went crazy.
Make sure you're okay.
We are not there yet,
Right.
and I'm not comfortable advocating for anything other. For now, I'm going to continue to build that out. I'm gonna build out as an efficient a system as I can, and I'm gonna lean on y'all where I can. But thank you very much for bringing it up, because that is going to be a thing, and it also is another question that I had for you guys. We have a mandate to open up our fund for applications at least once a year, but that can be more than this. And as we get to having more buckets of funding for more specific type of projects, for things like ADUs, I don't know about you, but if I was a homeowner, I might not want to wait a year to have a shot at some funds. And honestly, there's a housing crisis, and I don't want people to be waiting years or months to apply. So one of the things that I think we need to consider is either having a more frequent opening of applications, or having a standard open application period, but advertise the times when the funding is distributed. But I think getting projects into our evaluation pipeline early and often, instead of during a hyper tense application period, would probably go a long way, especially because these projects, they don't all operate on the same timeline. And they're all at various stages and in various times. And I don't know if we can have a completely open application system, but that's the direction that the other state funding sources are going. They're going to a rolling, always open to apply. And one of the things that would provide us is a higher touch communication with the projects that are out there. And we would have a better grip on what stage they're at. And even if they have to hang out in our application process for a full year until the funding they're after actually gets distributed, that's a whole year of communicating with them and finding ways to help them as they go.
And to that, I would say that other funding sources you're getting, that's definitely possible to do that rolling. The collection of the operator license fee is a different story, right?
Right.
So just to clarify that, because, you know, there's a big chunk that is collected between April and July, which is why we open that cycle, you know, in the fall. But if you, with that fund specifically, I don't know if we could do rolling because I have to budget that as a contract line item. But the other thing is you would have far less funding if you did open it up more frequently,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I think to your point, some of the other fundings with the money, you're getting, I definitely encourage that.
And like I said, the distribution time would probably remain the same, especially for our fund. But just being able to get people into the application pipeline, not necessarily giving them the money on a rolling basis, but being that them. I don't want somebody who's got a project plan for next year to be able to call me up and be like, well, you gotta wait till the application opens for me to really be able to help you here. I want to get their information now and keep it updated and find some way to let them feel like they're involved with us now.
Well, and I think that that's the piece is when people are making like a decision-making process, right? When somebody's ready to do a project and if it's maybe like speaking to people that are like not doing this day in and day out, when they're ready to make a decision, like being able to have that window of opportunity to help them through that decision-making process keeps them on, like gets their hook and gets them pulled in. Whereas if you wait, there's a chance that they're gonna like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then that motivation will go away. So I agree.
Did you think about, we would do the scoring on projects when they first come in?
I'm not sure about the evaluation and scoring.
I have a suggestion. I think I like the idea a lot of having an open application. And I think you could do a lot at the top of the application to just to explain that there are different funding sources that have different cycles. And some are revolving and the Housing Production Solutions Fund is an annual. I don't think it's realistic, both for the reasons that Sarah said, but also for the vetting and the county commissioners' decision-making process and all that stuff. It takes us a whole year we really do start getting those applications in, because you're already talking, most of the developers that apply have already been talking to you for 4 to 6 months. So I think that that's working as well as it can and within a time frame that is realistic. The other ones, I think that there is a really good opportunity, and it's not going to be as heavy of a criteria because it just has to be the criteria that these funds have, which are pretty minimal. And so that's already kind of predetermined. It's either going to check the box or it's not. So I feel like just having literally whatever those criteria are, we don't need to define which fund they go to, but just say, does your project, it is your project 800 square foot or less? Checkbox, yes or no. Is it this, is it that? Does it meet this 10% reduction? No, I don't know. Well, then you can have a conversation with them. It doesn't disqualify them from applying.
Right.
But it just kind of helps create a filter that expedites the process and helps us figure out if there's some buckets that we can be distributing through in a more timely manner.
Yeah. And as you were saying, that's something I was thinking about is if I get these projects to be providing the information, that's ammunition for me to go and get more buckets. If I say I've got 6 applications for projects that don't meet any of our funding solutions, but it meets yours. And if you give Tillamook County Housing Commission this fund, these 6 projects are lined up, they've been pre-vetted, and we're ready to distribute it. So having more information from them is the information that will take me, that I can take to LFA and say, hey, these are the projects that don't have funds that are ready to go. They want to build, they just need X and Y and Z, and they're off and away.
Well, that's why I think these agencies are coming to us, because they are sitting on money that's not moving, because the average person, and to Sarah's point, is not going to take the time to investigate funding sources at the state level, or it's just going to feel way too daunting.
Too much.
Yeah.
But when they're coming in, and I mean, that can be something that can, and that's something that could be in the realtor community. I mean, I'm sure constantly, we all constantly have people that are calling on law saying, I want to do something, what can I do? And when the process is too big, they walk away because they're like, this is too much. But if there's a way that it could be tied to like, hey, like this is some funding that can come along with it. There's this opportunity for you to do that. People will eat that up.
Well, and they might change their building plan based on the funding that's available, which is going to become more aligned with what the needs are.
Yeah.
So
Or have you thought about how many units, we talked about how many units we potentially through our existing rent program. We have a number that we've traditionally done, and do you have any sense of how many, like the DQ program, how many units can be incented to be built?
they actually broke it down by number of units, and it was 180. And they told me that was because it was 1.5x what I told them we could fund today. So they took the number of units that would be that their fund would apply for in their pipeline. And then they multiplied that by 1.5 and said, this is what your allocation will be if this is successful. So it's 180 units.
So some of them may be units that otherwise wouldn't be funded, others would be in addition to our money.
Yes. Some of this would double down on this project we've already funded, Home First and Maker, if we got the DEQ fund, they would both eat up the maximum amount on it. That actually brings up a special caveat on that and something to consider.
I was just gonna put that out.
Yes, so because this is a federal fund, it means that prevailing wages would apply to these funds. And so when I spoke with Ben Prey at Home First about this, he said, well, then we will have to do the math if we want to take more than $750,000 of it. Because if you're less than $750,000, then you don't have to do prevailing wages. But so there is a math calculation because prevailing wages on average add about 15% to your project. So they will have to decide if so for Ben's project, 60 units, 55 of which would be able to apply for this fund because some of that is now voucher housing that they receive vouchers for. So 55 would be, 1.2 million. And he would have to decide if it's worth it to take the additional 350 or 500,000, if that would escalate his building costs beyond the value of taking only 750,000.
If a project is designed to be a voucher program, does that make it fall into that category?
No, it just means that those units can't be double funded through other sources. So he's applying for 5 vouchers and those 5 vouchers come with support for building the units.
Oh, okay.
But those units are now set aside. Something that changed this year is that OHCS is willing to fund mixed projects now. In the past, it all had to be in the same AMI level. Now they will fund you if you have a project that is 10 units and 5 are workforce. They will fund you with the workforce fund for those 5 and with the affordable fund for the others, which is something they didn't do in the past. So,
for example, the Bayside Gardens project, it's going to be using vouchers.
all vouchers, 24.
Yeah. But that didn't impact their construction cost.
It did. I mean, it absolutely did.
Okay.
They built at a higher per square foot cost for the 30% and below AMI housing than Ben or Maker will be building for the workforce and affordable level.
Okay.
So it actually costs Darren more than what it'll cost Ben or Maker to build. But Darren is getting more fully supported through public funding.
And that's based on prevailing wage?
Part of that is prevailing wage,
Okay.
yes. Because HUD's federal. So once you take that money, you're locked into prevailing wages.
Sounds like SDCs, we need to. No, let's leave it alone.
Yes. But thank you. So that is a very, very good discussion. And really illustrates just,
Just a few thoughts for you, Parker. It seems to me that the number one role of this housing commission is to make sure that all of our developers and our realtors and other interested people know about every funding source known to mankind. Federal and state loans and grants, conventional loans and grants, or conventional loans, maybe even some private equity types of sources. And so in terms of your schematic up there about buckets, I think a big piece of this is on a regular basis, distributing information to all interested parties about what's available, not just through us, but through the Oregon OHCA. OHCS, yeah. So I would see that as our number one priority, is educational information, just distribution. Some of those funds are going to ultimately come through the Housing Commission, and we may even be asked to administer some of those funds, which is a whole different thing. And of course, the extent of our responsibilities in administering those funds will determine how our committees interplay with one another.
Sure.
Yeah. And so I'd like to see us kind of get into the requirements of each of these funds, the DEQ and the OFA requirements, before we make any decisions about how our subcommittees interact with each other, because each one's going to be different.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very fair question, point here. And it also brings me to a different flow chart I had. Is we're not always going to be flowing in the same direction. And what Dave is describing is like the funding driven flow of, we know these funds are available, how do we get it into a project? But there is this other thing that happens where a project comes to us and also says, I would like to do something. What's out there? And now I'm going to go, a project comes to me, goes to housing coordinator, I go to finance and say, here's the project, finance, what funds do you think apply? Development, how can the development committee help this project go forward? Education and outreach, does this project need to be advertised in some way, or does there outreach to a city or an area that needs to be performed? How can we help this project? So Dave, to Dave's point and to everyone else's point, there is this flow of work that is different depending on where we begin, what type of work we're doing, and what I don't see happening right now, though, and this is my failure, to be clear, is communicating all of these things to the committees. We are a little siloed in our committees, and we're not necessarily following a workflow of this. And so I guess a big part of this meeting is for you guys to have a chance to talk about how this work flows. And so you're not shocked when I start bringing things from committee to committee with expected work and outcome. So there's different ways that we flow information, different ways we support projects, different ways we go after funding. And these are just a few of the ways that I imagine them happening. But in general, I want you all to just be ready and aware to have a little more cohesiveness between the committee work. That the committees aren't just siloed into making Facebook posts for outreach and education, or looking for zombie properties in development, or evaluating financials and finance. That we need to be a little more intentful as we get a little more project driven and results driven, so that we can track these items as we go. I don't know how to do all of this, and this isn't me presenting a solution to you. This is me giving information and getting feedback on how you want me to do this better. So, yeah.
One positive, one solution I see is to bring back the executive committee. Because this was one opportunity for the committee chairs to get together and share ideas, and especially if it's a major project that's being worked on in transition, and say, okay, just collectively, everybody is aware of it. So that way it can be transitioned. And then, so, hey, I know, in finance, it's gonna be coming to development. So, we're gonna need to reach out to outreach and so at least everybody knows that, hey, there's something in the pipeline.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a possible effective tool.
I absolutely agree. And maybe this is a good time to talk about kind of where we're going with new members and what we see as needed. And, since I've started, we've kind of had a change over in the Housing Commission, but I would love to get the executive committee back steering the ship on these flow charts. So.
We could do each committee, when they meet, they could do just a one pager with bullet points of what they covered that can be distributed to everybody.
Now you're reading ahead. Education and outreach.
Is there any other further comments or what we'd like to do with this Housing Commission workflow discussion? It sounds like Michelle might have one.
Well, it is relevant to this. I was going to have it as part of the share out, but I think it's a good time to share it. So one of the things that we talked about is it's to Dave's point and to Ed's point just now, that we need to get information from the committees out through education and outreach. And the best way to do that would be for each chair to be responsible on a monthly basis for having a few bullet points for what's most salient, not so much of what the work is that you're doing, because it might be something that's 8 months out. It's what's relevant from what you're, what is it that you want people to know based on what you're working on in your committee? Because this is the general audience. It might also be a specific, maybe it's a municipal audience or a developer audience, and we can tailor messaging outside of social media to those audiences as well. So the bullet points could encompass general public, developer, other, employer, like we could have any number of different audiences that you're telling us we need to speak to with specific messaging. But one of the workflows that we want to develop, and Parker is in each of those meetings. So that's one avenue, is that during that meeting, those bullet points are identified and given to Parker, and he brings them to education and outreach. Another scenario would be that the chairs, that's a standing commitment for the executive committee meeting, that they bring that. And as chair, I can bring the bullet point messaging back into our committee. And from there, Kristen has agreed to craft the messaging for finance, Mark for legislative, and Parker for development, for DevCom. I think we need to call it that. And DevCom.
Like it.
Anyway, so the committees don't have to come up with the flowery messages and the, memes and all that. If you have images to send that fits relevant, that's super helpful. But our committee's willing, and Sarah's working on the Canvas side of things to create some cool graphics, so we can have like maybe some brand colors that are tied to DevCom versus finance versus.
Well, that'd be really easy just to have some standard things that you just go in and drop those into
Exactly.
each month. And
So it'll go pretty
not have to
quickly.
recreate the wheel every month.
Exactly, but if we have to come find you and find out what are we sharing this month from finance committee, it's not gonna happen. Because it needs to be just this embedded workflow. But we're committed to having one post a month for each of the committees, priority messaging. And we'll have priority messaging already, so we should be getting 2 to 3 messages out through our channels on a regular basis.
Kristen has a comment. She has her hand up.
Go for it, Kristen.
Yeah, I don't know if you've noticed, but the Pioneer News lately has been distributing the city meeting notes from Manzanita, from Rockaway, from, I think, either Wheeler or Nehalem. And they just are distributing, cities are using the Pioneer as a way to get their message out to the community. Like, rather than just post stuff on our website, we could consider publicizing our activities through one of the news outlets and have it reach a bigger audience. Like, that news comes to you rather than you coming to our website.
We originally had a plan to release pieces on a regular basis, and it's just been kind of a capacity thing, but I agree. We should have, that's a best practice. We absolutely should be doing that. We still want to drive people back to the Housing Commission website though, from whatever is shared out, whether it's a press release or a social media post.
And some of those social media stuff, I mean, paying for advertising isn't something that we really want to do. However, Facebook has a pretty solid way of utilizing sponsored posts, and they're not ridiculously expensive. I can even share my experience with that.
So not expensive, it's just very, very difficult for a security conscious municipality to be able to actually give Facebook
We
money.
have so.
They do it in public health. There's precedent.
Yes.
How do the South County areas that are unincorporated in our cities, how do they communicate?
So there's the Pacific City Sun, which is the newspaper in South County that is very highly regarded and is very nicely put together. So I think that's what we would want to use.
So they communicate some committee that's formed down there in Pacific City, for example.
Oh, so we have the CACs
Right.
in Pacific City and in Nescoin that are both very active. And I do give updates. I attend their meetings regularly. And then Tierra del Mar have a community association that meets twice a year. So I will be going to their Memorial Day weekend meeting to give updates. So there are conduits out there.
Okay.
I would say the paper is probably the most organized.
But I'd like to go back to Dave's comment. I think that, yes, one of the most important things that the Housing Commission does is distribute information about funding options for housing. But one of the important functions, one of the important activities we do is evaluating the projects. And that's what's bringing home the bacon right now. And I want us to, in our general conversations, just look at ourselves that way. Like, we are a group of experts who know more about evaluating the viability of a project to meet housing needs in Tillamook County than anywhere else. And that needs to be part of your personal messaging about us and how you view us, because I am going out there and selling that. And as we continue down this path, I need everybody to be driving towards improving that at all times. We need to stay at the very tippy top. We need to stay the leaders on this. We're years ahead of most small communities, and it's what's winning us funds. And it's what I want to continue to trade on. And so, yes, what the most important thing we do locally and internally is get that information out to developers. But one of the key functions of this is to be that group of expert evaluators too.
What, maybe we're due to have a new updated, single sheet of who we are. I know we had the 4 different, sections, but, issues like, we fund developments, people think, hey, you put all that money in it, but we fund an increment that gets it over the top.
Right.
And that needs to be part of the message, that we're facilitating things that otherwise wouldn't happen. We weren't there, but we're not paying the full.
We're not the be all and end all.
Yeah.
We're not the only place you can stop to make your project happen. But I do think that as we expand our buckets, as we expand our reach, as we expand our need, and as the options of what is available to be built here expands, we just have to be ready to grow with that. And that we are moving beyond what this commission was originally, administering our one fund is no longer the only thing that we do, and that we are going to have to play by other people's rules soon in ways that we haven't before. And we are going to be able to do a lot more. And we're not just going to be giving away tiny bits to help projects get a little further along. We're going to be able to really push some forward.
Is that something, Michelle, you could give us?
Yeah, I wrote it down for you.
Why fight, right?
Yeah, doing a 1-pager on the
That
funding
would be
sources.
really helpful for me anyway. It's kind of your
Yeah,
elevator speech.
It just in general, some talking points for all of us, because none of us have the time, at least I guess I don't have the time to really, I'm not going to be able to read the 300-page FCC report, for example. So we need to help each other out, that each of the committee subject matter experts can sift through that information, come up with the salient details, and then we can plug those into 1-page fact sheets that are to our benefit as talking points, but then also to share out to the broader community. So again, my request would be that each of the committee chairs work within their committees to, like, on the finance, for example, all of those different groups have been identified. I know I've been taking notes because I don't know that much about them yet, but finance probably does. And so helping us out by giving us the details that we want to have shared that we think are the most relevant, then we can package it up and get it distributed out.
Right, like what are those 5 bullet points that
Yeah.
go on to a fact sheet?
Yeah, and we can always send people to the website and to Parker for more information, but just, it's a hook to pull them in to long enough to realize, like, this is relevant to me. This is something I can act on, that I feel equipped to do something with. Those are the goals, I think, for these very high level, not super in-depth communication pieces.
I'd like to share with you guys something that happened at the Clatsop County Housing Task Force this week. They had somebody come to their task force just to present the project that they were considering. Mom and pop developer wanted to buy a multifamily mixed use building and develop it. And there wasn't any funding available for them. They weren't applying for any help. They weren't asking for a variance. All they did was come and share their project. And in that meeting, one of the things that illustrated where we're at versus them is they basically said, that's great. Thank you. Like, we look forward to helping in any way we can. And I chimed in, I was like, hey, this project qualifies for the USDA loan guarantee program. And that kicked off another discussion. Someone else in the room had some other thing that could possibly help. But one of the things I realized was that there's this great value in bringing projects in to present to us more than just once a year. And I don't know if you guys recall, but we went through those applications, those 8 ones, 2 meetings, pretty rapid fire. But each time somebody presented, a connection was made somewhere beyond just this horseshoe. I know projects connected with Rich at some point, just in the background. I know that developers spoke to each other and got information that they wouldn't have otherwise had. So I see this great value in when we see these projects that are early on or halfway there, bringing them here and presenting to us, even if we don't have something right now for them, there's a lot of value in that. So if that's something you guys see value in too, I want to include in our application process, just, you don't have to present on X day, come to present to us whenever. And when it's time for funding, yes, come and give us an update and show us what's changed. But we don't need to have these big, long presentations one big day of the year. If there are projects and they just want to say, hey, come to the Housing Commission, tell us what you're interested in, tell us your property, let's see what shakes out. I think that there's a lot of value there. So that's something I'm going to start doing with your permission, is when these projects come to me, my first thing is, hey, I don't know exactly how we can help you, but let's get you in front of the Housing Commission and we're going to put our heads together and we're going to go through all the resources we know of and see what we can do. But that should be, that's a tool I would like to put into my belt, but I don't want to do that without your guys's express, that's a good idea, Parker.
I mean, that's a two-way street of motivation, right? Like, that's a motivation for, like, hearing those projects happening. It's a motivation for all of us to continue to stay on these committees and just continue to do this work. But it also is a motivation to have somebody come up here and have a table, or however many tables, room full of people say, like, this is really cool. I'm really excited about that. Like, that's like hitting on motivation on both sides of it. So.
It reminds me of Kevin Shluka. He came in from the beginning. He didn't break ground and said, hey, I'm planning this great project. And then throughout the process, he was giving us updates. But from the door, when he first came and gave us a presentation, it was it got us all motivated from the beginning. I was like, yes, it's a project we can get behind.
It also nodding up on the screen as well.
It also elevates our expert understanding. It gives us practice and it keeps us on that cutting edge of knowing what's going on and where the problems are. So I think that is, going forward, something that I see as being almost a part of every meeting we have, is I'm going to try and have somebody here to talk about their project whenever I can. And I think that is where we, Council of Elders, are our way to a solution. I don't want to get too far past our meeting agenda, so I do wanted to have a moment to check in.
Do you want to stop sharing your screen?
I do not want to. I do now actually want to use it again, finally.
Okay. I'm just not sure if everyone can see us. So when
Yeah.
So
Back to my screen here. Just an update on the Housing Production Solutions Fund process improvements. Nobody's laughing at my strike through for multifamily fund, but I'm still chuckling. So I just wanted to give you guys some of the things that came out of committees. Last month, I told you I was going to ask all the committees for some process improvement ideas and whatnot. The big one right now is that standardized pro forma template. Dave and I are going to take that on as kind of a special project before bringing it back to the Finance Committee for evaluation. But we're going to hold off on that until we find out what sort of funds might be in our bucket, because we don't want to make it just for one thing that's not actually there. Same thing with the framework document rework. We do need to rework our Housing Production Solutions Fund, especially because it has an awesome new name. But I also don't want to make that so specific that it frustrates our ability to include other funding if we do that single application. So that's going to need some careful consideration, but it's on the works. It's not getting forgotten. We made a name change. The Colback Partnership should be established on April 11th. Colpack will be joining me at the OFA meeting, which is great because they understand some of the mechanisms better than me, and I will need to rely on them. So that is cruising along. Our representative is going to be Sarah Lou Heath. Our request to have Colpack's partnership caused a whole shakeup. And now they are moving one person into a position to basically do this type of work all over the state. Because they knew they were supposed to be doing this, but they didn't really have anybody assigned to this work. So we caused a bit of a shakeup, and Sarah Lou will be kind of dedicated to projects. That includes the ability to put out the 2023 round of funding in forgivable loan format, which 3 of our projects have expressly asked for and are willing to wait any amount of time for, just to illustrate how important that can be for tax consequences. 3 of the projects said, we need the money now, we got bills to pay, and it sucks, we got to pay taxes on it, but we got to go. The other 3 said, I would wait forever if I didn't have to pay taxes on this in a forgivable loan format. So a mix of both, but in the future, we're going to be able to get those out quicker. And I expect most of our developers are going to request it that way. So we're probably into issuing our last grants. Also a bit of update, we got our first contract approved by the Board of County Commissioners for the 2023 funding cycle. Maker's check will get cut within the week, and they have bills to pay, including engineering work that they have been pushing back so that they had the money to pay the guy to start the work. So, and finally, we've already kind of covered the single application thing. I just wanted to share with you guys this.
I don't hear anything.
Sorry, Kristen, it won't come across online.
Here today, it's a great place to do business. We look forward to bringing 4 units to the market here in Tillamook to serve the community. And after that, we're going to go. Thank you.
You should put that.
Right. For everybody at home, this was a video of Danny McGinley, the project lead on the First Street development, just singing our praises and talking about how great it is to do business here right in front of his project. This is the first time I've gone and asked a developer to talk about their project in front of it. But this is now the cost of doing business with me. If they want phone calls, if they want anything, if they come to town, we go to their project and they have to do this now. Danny was here because I was connecting him with the Tillamook Family Counseling Center. And I noticed that they had these 4 positions that they were offering $7,500 moving incentive for, and that they had been up for over 30 days. And these are for behavioral health clinicians. And Danny has been really vocal about asking me to help connect him with local partnerships. He needs that pre-leasing, just like all those workforce housing projects do. They need that pre-leasing done. So I've gone to the Family Counseling Center board meeting, told them about what pre-leasing is, how they can help, what the general risks and benefits are in these kinds of scenarios. And they were very interested. I told Danny that they were interested. Danny said, I'm coming down Monday, give me an appointment with Frank. So we went and sat with Frank Hannah Williams, the director over there, and they are very excited to get into the pre-leasing element of this. And that is really encouraging. And I got to say, it was one of the warmest I've felt about doing this work, like seeing one community need, another community need, and then working together for a solution just totally fills my well and heart. So.
Guys, we're about ready to kick off our next community health needs assessment. The current one identified access to care, housing, and economic stability as the 3 biggest issues to address. And this is a perfect example of a convergence of all of those in an actual project. So it's really gratifying for me as the wellness the county wellness coordinator, with that hat on to see this working out the way it is. So good job being extra thoughtful, taking it to a community partner that has that need.
I mean, and that could carry over in so many different avenues, like thinking on like school districts and places that state employees and county, like when you hire somebody, not being able to find a space for somebody to exist or live, or, you know, that's huge.
Really poor ratios for mental and behavioral health counseling, and the housing is a big driver of it. And we've got similar issues recruiting teachers.
Yeah.
So this is going to be an economic development driver ultimately, which is super important.
Parker and I,
Somebody-
well, we've talked about employee-owned housing, the
Yeah.
pluses and minuses and issues involved in that. And I think that's gonna be an important thing that we do research. We can't really counsel people on it. They need to do their own look. But,
Right.
you know,
But it's an option out there. It's a tool in the belt, and I see great opportunity for these partnerships. Somebody who was at the Family Counseling Center is connected to the Neoconi School District. They saw what I was doing. Neoconi School District emailed me yesterday from the superintendent saying, I heard about these projects in Manzanita. How do we get in at the ground level? So it's one leads to another, but it's been a good one for a lot of these kind of nudges on pushing things forward. I don't want to take up any more time because we do have our normal updates to get through. But if there's any comment that anybody would like to, about whether anything we've talked about up till now, people at home, we will be posting the video of Danny to our Facebook page, so you will be able to check it out there and hear the audio. I'll hopefully figure out how to get audio through the Zoom meeting next time I share a video, but with that, I think I'll pass it off to Outreach for an update, but we've covered most of it.
Most of it. I think the only thing I would add is that Parker was interviewed on KTIL, and that recording has been uploaded and shared out on our social media page. And so we encourage you to take a listen. He does a really good job level setting what we are and why we're here, what some of the definitions of things like affordable and workforce housing and how our fund has been helping. And it's a really great introductory social post for our cascade of messages that are going to be coming out through that. But I back to Kirsten's point earlier, we do want to make sure we're not only messaging through social media, because there's a lot of people that we want to reach that are social media users. So we'll be expanding, but it is a capacity thing. The other thing we figured out is if we do the work during the meeting, we can get a lot done. So it was a really productive meeting.
Super good.
We did some pre-work and then we finalized and crafted some messaging in the meeting. And then that kind of filled the hopper for Parker to start posting. So that's going to be our workflow going forward, which helped. Did I miss anything? Anybody else?
I just liked that, Parker utilized the radio to be able to get a message out to a broader audience, and then turning around and taking that and replicating it to this other broader audience. And that was something that we talked about in that meeting, is how do we take these things that are being done here and send them out to this avenue?
We're also looking at an e-newsletter, and that's another audience. The same message, the radio interview is going to go out in all these different mediums, and it's going to hit different types of audiences. And it's a nice way of using limited time and resources to get out the messaging as broadly as we can.
Yeah, and I'll be back on the radio every 2 months going forward.
Great.
and we're outreaching to like South County, to like the newspaper.
When we do press releases, we have, so like, for example, when we promoted the application, that went out to all of the media outlets, the print media,
Yeah.
through social media, through a pretty extensive network. I want to give a shout out to Gail and to Barbara, who's not here, but Gail is, because we worked really hard to come up with a really comprehensive list of, not just me, I mean, we sent to the BBQ list in North County. So if anybody's from North County, they know what I'm talking about, but just how people get information. The Kiwanda Community Center has a newsletter. And we have relationships with all of those outlets, sharing on the community pages from our Facebook page, then taking that and sharing it out through all of those different community pages is another avenue. This is where people get their information. So we're trying to be really intentional and thorough.
And to that point, you know, other channels that are important for us, I'm starting to build a LinkedIn page for the Housing Commission. I'll eventually ask you all to like it. And just that's a better channel to reach out to developers who aren't in our area, but we could maybe convince to come and operate here.
Okay. Dave?
Okay, Finance Committee. So Parker's been talking about us becoming expert housing project evaluators. We've got a little bit of work to do on that yet. I learned a lot in this last go round, and with regard to the types of applications we received, and it was probably similar to the year before. But just as kind of a reminder, we had such a wide range, such a wide variety of applicants. So for example, in terms of status of development, we had some applicants who were just in their due diligence and others who were under construction. How do we deal with that in terms of assigning points, for example? I'm thinking that someone who hasn't done all their due diligence yet probably doesn't need to get as high a score as someone who has done their due diligence and knows that the project will fly, at least in terms of entitlements and so on, versus us trying to fund somebody's basic concept that really hasn't been really vetted. Funding status, we had some applicants who had no funding yet and others that were fully funded. That's kind of interesting. They were fully funded projects, but they came to us asking for funding. The idea was on both those applications that when they were done with their project, the value would be here, but their loan would be here. So they thought that they would be underwater with regard to their loan or at least their total investment. Is that an appropriate thing for us to do, to send money to a developer who's already fully funded, but just feels that it may not be a great return on their investment? Another thing we noticed was developer experience. We had some folks that had never developed anything before and others who were well experienced with that. So again, how do we assign points to that and how do we evaluate that? Another interesting one was the development fees. We had some projects that just looked like they were really going to have trouble penciling out. I'm just not sure they're going to be profitable, at least in the short term. We had another applicant who was proposing over a $3 million developer's fee. They're coming to us asking for funding, and yet in their total budget, they had a $3 million developer's fee in there. So again, how do we deal with that? Quality of applications. We had some that were very good quality, others that were not. Math errors in some of them, for example. And so these are all kind of subjective areas that we're trying to apply points to. And that's not easy to do. And so this whole framework does need some additional refinement and some work. And so the Finance Committee will be working on that.
Well, Dave, if I may, to your point, like thinking about TLT grants and other things, when that money is being distributed, there's also an ask that the applicant provide a letter or a form with the application confirming that they understand what their land use processes are, not building, but if someone's proposing something that actually isn't going to work because it can't get approved and they're in that preliminary development phase, you want to make sure there's at least been a conversation with local planning and zoning. I mean, if they need a conditional use, that's fine. But you know that walking in, if it's like, sorry, this is a great project, but we just can't get it off the ground, you might want to know that before you start distributing funds. I have quietly done that in the background to date. So moving forward, just know that there's been an internal vetting process that wasn't part of what you saw, just because it is county funds. And I want to make sure if there's an issue, David Madison talked about Siegel's Rest and the tiny home project, so having that engagement and that interface through this process is great. But to your point, there are a lot of unknowns. And as you get more money and you have more processes, you might want to.
And having some questions though, that they work with municipal.
Well, I just wonder, would you even talk about like wetland mitigation on a site where they show that they're gonna be building here, but that there's probably gonna be a delineation that's gonna.
Yeah, and it's just, and we haven't seen anything to that extent yet.
Yeah.
But I think that that's a great point. And Michelle, they check the box. They always check the box, but that box and that statement is tailored to so many different types of applications.
Maybe it's similar to the application process, like the building application, where you have to have had the conversation with the fire department, where you've had to have had the conversation, like.
Right, and
we said going through some of the community development where you go book an appointment, having had a zoning conversation, having had some of those conversations beforehand.
Or at least, and I would say make it not extensive, but you want some sort of reassurance before you give someone $60,000 that there's a path forward. Even if it costs a lot of money, there's
Right.
still a path.
Right.
I'm just kind of coalescing some of the really great points I've heard over the last few minutes and going back to that bringing projects to us.
Mhm.
One thing we could consider is that before you apply for anything on an online portal, send us an email, do anything, maybe your first stop is to come and present to us. I mean, there's so many questions that we have that we could get answered and see exactly where someone's at in the process.
I like that, but as a cautionary tale, I'm gonna say this differently. What I appreciate about the commission and the commission's role is it gives people an opportunity to dream. This is a safe space where someone can come to you and share their goals and their vision, and they don't have me or someone else that they're sitting at a table with. Greg knows, you know, where they're like, well, you know, not that you do that, but you know, I mean, I love the separation of this is where people come to get feedback and share their vision. They have enough to do with us later that's going to help reshape, refine. Sometimes, you know, during the process, they walk away with more questions than they got answers to because these conversations evolve. I want them to come here and to be able to talk and share without those tethers, because I think that's so critical. But when we start talking about money, I think there does need to be just a very high level, you know, you're giving somebody 60 grand that has a chance of getting it done.
Didn't the first round of application have some sort of, similar to like the zoning
Yeah.
compatibility sign off sheet?
I did those with TJ.
Yeah.
And I've done them in the background for this process, but I mean, we could formalize it.
Yeah,
It's just, I'm not sure to the degree, because you don't want to start inviting some sort of a daunting task.
Right.
yeah,
Right.
but yeah, just something, I mean, at least that felt like there were steps to be taken, but we had some assurances.
But
by
To be,
being known.
being
But to-
cautionary though, about not having to say something and then the person, but the group told me I could. Yes, I would got that.
Dave and I and.
It's
Mary.
concerning that if somebody is applying and they've never actually walked into the county or whatever city they're within, they've never actually stood at the counter and had a conversation with somebody or
I
even.
don't think we had one though.
Okay, good.
Yeah, the
No.
two cycles.
We do a lot of work together
Yeah.
too. So when people are talking to Parker, they come my direction. If I'm talking to someone first, I send them to Parker. And I think internally that's what makes this work, because I'll say, I know of funding opportunities. So this is a great project and I'm gonna have you talk to Parker. Or he'll say, that's great. Let's get you to a planner.
Let's make sure it's possible.
Yeah,
Right.
and so we do, I'm proud of that work. We do good
Yeah.
work together in doing that. I just, to Dave, taking everything that Dave said to heart, I agree. And I just think that's the other element. And I would love to see your hosts of presentations separated from, give them the space to dream and dream with you, and they leave here encouraged
Yeah.
before they gotta, you know, get down to brass tacks.
Maybe as you look at these applicants and whatnot, to see the potential of having not just forgivable loans, but a revolving loan fund where we would receive some money back so we could build a bigger piece of money that we could then give out over time.
Pack will also be attending one of our meetings soon to talk about the options for setting up things like that. And that's a conversation that will also have to go through Commissioner Scar, because that is fundamentally shifting what the funds are specified for. So we might have to change something there.
Okay.
But that, I don't think there's anybody who said that's a bad idea to get this money revolving and getting back into the community quicker. So, yeah.
Sure, I love that idea about come share your dreams with us.
Yeah,
Well said, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, Finance Committee, continuing here. Parker has asked us to start preparing snippets or paragraphs with regard to really any kind of housing funding sources that we may know of. So it's trying to build that database, build that information. They could be put out in a 1 or 2 page summary on a periodic basis to developers, realtors, lenders, and others. And so that's something that he has assigned to us as committee members and that we're going to be working on. Last thing I wanted to share with you is a little more sensitive perhaps. County Budget Fund 122 holds our multifamily housing fund monies. I've been looking at that and it looks to me like there are extra funds that have not yet been spent for multifamily housing. Been asking about this for some time, and got some feedback. Recently got feedback said, no, Dave, there are no extra funds. Now, in some areas of my life, when I get a no, I just drop it, like at home, you know, I might make a request and get a hard no, and okay.
Been there.
But in this case, I'd love to compare my analysis with the treasurer's analysis or whomever makes that decision. There are no additional funds available. Now, it's likely I've made an error, but if nothing else, I'd love to know what my error is.
What's your amount, if you don't mind?
Several $100,000.
Okay, because I mean, isn't the position that you're holding part of that money?
It is, but there's also, so it's a collection projection. The other piece of it is, and this was a learning curve for me. If we award funds, and I'm going to caveat this saying this is the operator license fee. When we start talking about rolling funds for other pots of money, it may or may not be different. So I'll use the first funding round. So we awarded funds, the end of the year? During the first cycle, we opened it in July. We had 3 projects that followed the path with the grants and we got them through the chute right away. We had 3 projects that then wanted to deviate from that initial. Them were awarded then the following fiscal year. So there is a carryover amount from one year to the other based on when we award the funds. And if, lesson learned for me, in doing budgeting for the following fiscal year, I did not think about those funds carrying over and being able to be used. Because if I don't budget the right amount, it may be in the funds, but I have to wait for the next budget cycle to re-budget that to come in. So Dave, yes, let's let you and I and Sean and Commissioner Scar will talk, but those are ultimately earmarked. The 400,000 is what we felt was secure based on the operator license fee collection. If more is accumulated over a fiscal year, then the following fiscal year, I can budget that in. But if I don't budget it, it can't be spent. But if I project, I've got other issues. And this year is going to be even more interesting because with the programmatic changes and the regulatory updates to Ordinance 84 Amendment 2 that Dave and others were very involved in, we are lowering maximum occupancy of some rentals, which was part of the community livability issue, right? Of too many people in a rental. That is going to have a direct impact on the STR operator license fee because that fee is determined by maximum occupancy. And so I don't know where we're going to be. So the funds, there may be more in there than what's been budgeted for, but it's because of the rollover in the fiscal year and what I can and cannot spend based on what I've budgeted and projected. And I'm giving my best guess on closures, new licenses, maximum occupancy adjustments, and when they'll pay. So that's why all of that is the way it is. So yes, I am confident it looks like there's more money in there, but it's this rolling thing that Sean and I and Commissioner Scar are working through.
You know, if it impacted the ability that this program to like do another round or fund additional projects. Does the county do supplemental budgets where you can do something mid-year?
We have to have a public hearing though. So
Can we
it's not
pull this money out?
impossible, huh?
Can we pull this money out? I know it's being
It's,
assessed or whatever through the county, but can it go from the county to Colpack and then?
that's a good question. It's a special revenue fund. So it's not part of the general fund. So that's good. We intentionally created a special revenue fund for this, so it could not be used for general fund. Right? So it can't be used to supplement or, fund anything other than what it has been intended to. But, and you'll see, I don't know if you looked at the budget proposal for this year, but I actually bumped way up the contracted services line item, which is where the funds that you distribute come out of.
When you say this year, you mean
This coming fiscal year, right? So if you look at the proposed budget, we all have budget hearings next week. But I bumped that up because the lesson learned was if you don't have it line itemized, you don't get to release it. So that's where, so look at that contracted services. I think I bumped it up to $1 million. For the housing commission, understanding now this revolving issue of funding. And when I can and cannot spend the funds based on what I budget for the fiscal year. So that should fix that, and you're gonna see. That gives me more flexibility to work with Sean on that disbursement, but depending on.
Does that money sit someplace where it's growing, or is it?
No, it's in its own dedicated fund, so it cannot be touched for anything else.
So the 400,000 that we budgeted for the current fiscal year, I think is well done. So I think it was the right number. To give you a little different perspective on this, what if you go back and look in history, for the 21-22 year, in other words, the fiscal year ending June 30 of 22, we collected $700,000 in fees, but we didn't spend any of that year. And so that's that carry forward. And so for the next year, for example, for the year end of June of 23, we collected $800,000. We spent $710,000. That was the first year. And some of that's been rolled over, but we have plenty to cover for that. And then the full year, we're budgeting to collect $750,000, and we're going to spend $400,000 of that. The rest of that goes to administrative staff support and so on. So a lot of this big difference I'm seeing in unspent monies really comes from the very first year.
The very first year. So then that's what we need to, and is that revenue only, or does that include the ARPA funding that we got?
That was revenue only. The ARPA funding was in addition to that, yeah. But there was no charges against the fund that year, that very first year for administrative costs, and that's where the difference is.
Does that line up with when you started the STRO? Because I thought it was after 22.
It was. So I think what you're seeing is the carryover that is now being spent now with the money that we are releasing. Let's talk to Sean about that.
I'd love to.
Yeah.
If nothing else, I think we would all agree that having funds in a bank account doesn't do anybody. Let's get that stuff deployed. Let's get people housed. And if there are additional funds, let's jump on that and maybe have a new funding, new disbursement round in September. And Park, you mentioned something about a funding round in September.
I mean, that's when we opened up the last round.
Oh, I see. It's starting in September.
But yeah,
Because we don't know how much we have an operator fee until then, because the majority of it's collected over the summer.
So additional funds, I'd like to see us get them dispersed in September.
Yeah. No, it's because it is a special revenue fund, all of the rules are very different. But we did bump up the contracted services because whatever we can. I don't want the funding distribution be held back because I didn't put enough in. So that has changed.
And Sarah, to your point, I'm not sure that there is a way to get that money working for us. In the several months out of the year we have it held. I don't think we're gonna get much of a return, or it would be worth it.
Okay. Dave, anything else?
Good questions, Dave. I appreciate that.
Let's see, Carrie.
Just a quick update. We are moving to quarterly meetings. Now that the legislative session is over, our next meeting will be in June. in which we are gonna take a deeper dive into. Right now, our committee members are looking at the governmental tax large, huge bill. And we will be having a robust discussion on the actual the rules that are provided within. Because that did encase several different things that impacted us, including the urban growth boundary adjustment, as well as a revolving multifamily housing fund. And then I think a subsequent tax exemption program. So there were quite a few things that could potentially impact housing and provide options. So we are going to be taking a deeper dive into those and figuring out how applicable those are to our county and what the next options are. So in June, and then and if we could update the website.
Yep.
So we're gonna take have some little breather time because right now there is only so much legislation that's conversations we can have between now and the 25 legislative session.
And to add on to that, we do meet more regularly during the sessions.
Yes, actually the last 2 or 3 weeks of the session, we were meeting every two. Well, actually, halfway through, we started realizing that we needed to be meeting. We were actually meeting every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So we were calling special meetings just to be able to keep up with the changes. So
You do a super job on that.
we had Trevor stepped up immensely this year.
Trevor did a great job.
And actually took charge of the spreadsheet. So it was a nice breather for the year.
Really use that space.
Is there any way, maybe somebody from the Association of Counties that it covered, that's their, has the legislative relationship, that they maybe come out and visit with us here?
I could actually arrange that. I work with them directly. So, yeah.
And we've had conversations with, there is a lobbyist from the League of Oregon Cities too, because we do have city representatives as well.
Maybe they both can come and do
I
a.
would love to
Be a great idea.
have a great conversation, and if we want to have it here at the commission level, that would be great.
Yeah.
Just to hear feedback from our whole committee. Because we may want to shape our legislative priorities going into 2025. There might be some tweaks that we want to make, but there may not. The infrastructure seems to be the biggest thing going forward into 2025, and that is still our number one priority. So we are in a lot of alignment. Go ahead.
Ariel, your contact?
I believe so. I believe she's the current.
Would you like me to reach out to her and to
Yes,
Brandon?
yes, please.
Okay, I'll do that and work with her on that.
Super. DevCom.
DevCom, this was supposed to be you. That was a holdover from
That's
last
okay.
time. So, but you go ahead or I'll do it.
I'll have to look back at all my minutes I took, but, we had a long meeting. We meet at the kitchen in Bay City, which is really great. We get coffee and relaxed atmosphere. God, we went over a whole bunch of things we talked about, in the meeting so far today. Let's see if there's anything else.
Yeah, to its point, DevCom was definitely where kind of all the workflow discussions started, and then it kind of carried over to each of the committees.
Yeah, we talked about, what our role might be with helping the cities, with their adjustments to their urban growth boundaries and the rest. I don't think we're quite there yet, exactly what we're gonna do, but, we're aware that, we want to be helpful in any way we can. Talked about a lot of individual projects, that we knew about. Anything else you could think of?
Just along what you just said, having Dave Madison there helps because of the whole city conversation.
Yeah.
He gives his perspective, being the planner there, so it makes it a lot easier.
And it's good having your perspective as a builder developer on our group too.
Yes.
And we have Mary Kay from the real estate industry. So we got a good group. I'm real pleased with that. Can't think of anything else. Can you think of anything else specific that?
No, it was a great meeting. We worked through a lot of things that have been carrying over, especially those individual project conversations, and that the developer city relationship gets fleshed out in there really well, and we're finding ways to help those communications increase. And so it's great having Greg and Dave Madison and all the other fantastic experts in that room.
And
I do have one thing,
Sure.
Ed. So I was sitting here thinking about this. So we have officially kicked off Senate Bill 406 implementation for the zoning stuff.
Right.
I've had a couple of kickoff meetings with city planners and managers, and I am now meeting bi-weekly with the consulting team. If you want me to be part of your agenda to start giving those updates on all of that work, so you can follow along with this first phase, I would be happy to do that.
okay, we'll buy you a cup of coffee too.
No, oh, no, I mean, I'm in the country, but I mean, I'm here.
Okay.
I will go anywhere for coffee.
Well, my battery is down to 4%, so
Anybody else have something, whatever, and then, do you have anything you want to add after all this stuff?
Yeah, basically it's an outsider coming into the community and dealing with, I've pretty much dealt with everybody from the city to the county to the port to the state to everything. I heard horror stories of dealing with this, but you guys are great. I really gotta tell you that coming to these meetings also, I'm learning a lot. I like the idea of doing an application. Like if I can do an application to show you guys what we can do and what I'd like to do. And then what you were saying that from kind of you name it. So that's of interest. And then of course, I'm trying to do some projects with the ports, with the web hanger and other properties here on the ports. So like I said, I really like working with you guys and one actually, so I usually say get something done to everybody's day.
Thank you for coming. Thank you very much. I guess the last thing I'd say is I'm gonna step down as chair. I have to go through some additional cancer treatment, which I wasn't real excited about, but that starts the end of the month. And just because I don't know the impact of it, I can't guarantee I'll be here every time. And so you need somebody that has that consistency. I want to stay in the commission and I might be a little window up there instead of sitting here, but,
and I know you're gonna want to continue chairing DevCom, especially with their name.
yeah.
We'll carry that conversation through this month. But thank you so much for
Yeah.
chairing it for so long and bringing it where it is.
Thank you, and be thinking about who might want to do that role. It's I think it's an important role for Parker because he tells me everything pretty much.
Yeah, totally.
And it's always nice to know I forget a lot of it, but you know. So anyway, yeah, I think it's important to have a chair that, you know, he calls me all the time, so that's good.
I'll miss those phone calls.
Yeah.
I'm still gonna make them. But just
I
do it
I
special.
did have a small process question. A city official asked me, if there's time, how we police if when we give money for a project and we say this will be in perpetuity, but can't have short-term rentals. Basically, how can they trust us when we say, what's the process of policing?
Sure.
And I said, it gets policed, and then I was like, I have no idea.
I can answer that question very directly. So we will be doing our first rent checks on the projects we've supported from the 2022 cycle in June. When projects sign their contract to receive our funds, it includes a update and a schedule, or an update form and a schedule which they need to fill that out and get it to me every year. The date is June 30th, and the very first ones are coming due this June. So, those projects, and that's Lisa Greiner, Kevin Scholka. The other one, that those projects were funded and supported, and they need to start sending to me what their current rent checks are. Their rent is, how it compares to AMI, what their occupancy level is. But we check that annually. And then if they are in violation, that triggers our ability to engage the clawback provisions, which is basically we're taking it back plus 15%. So.
And to your question about short-term rental use, there's a couple of ways. One, unless the property is within city limits, all STR licensing comes through community development. Okay, so I'm gonna see them firsthand. We work with the cities, especially to Parker's point about sharing information about rents, et cetera. We also primarily have licensing requirements, so we're all going to see. And lastly, there's TLT filing that they have to do quarterly. So if we have any question or concern, there's a lot of ways for us to check.
Is there a process of some, like what, like, if somebody were to do that, is there a process, like what happens next? Is it
If
a,
there's violation,
yeah,
I call up Bill Sargent, we look at the contract and we go after them in the best way we can.
Okay.
And so just to recall, just to remind you guys though, that pre-development funding, and this is one of the reasons we'd like to separate that, is pre-development funding does not have a clawback attached to it. And that's because we recognize that that is high-risk activity and we are taking on that risk with our funds. So just to remind you that not all of our funds are clawbackable. But if a project makes it to occupancy, then we are kind of in business on the rent checks and everything. So I guess the only question I would have is if a project was funded with pre-development funding, got to occupancy, and then we're in violation, I don't know how we would be clawing something back.
That's for the attorneys to.
And that's for the attorneys,
That
exactly.
hopefully We never.
And hopefully we never deal with this.
Answer that.
But the question is, at that point, it's getting kicked out of our hands.
Right.
But the other thing is most of these have applied for other funding that are also.
That's
going
right.
To be
Yes.
contingent
Yes.
on that. So there's more than our check and balance
Right.
in play in most of these
I
developments.
just wanted to.
And often we're more stringent than
I
ours.
wasn't just saying it,
Yeah.
it's delicate.
Fair question.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
I get that often as well.
We're late.
Yeah.
For the first time in many moons.
Thank you all so
It's
much.
worth it. I appreciate the extra questions and discussion from today.
Yeah.
I'm still learning a lot as a commissioner.
Bye, Kristen. Bye, Marlita.
You said Bayside College is all voucher.
Bayside Commons is all action.
And then